better goddamn guns.
You are fined 1 credit for a violation of the verbal morality statute.
What?
Your repeated violation of the verbal morality statute has caused me to notify the San Angeles Police Department.
They're right. Fuckers are fast, too.
Protect serve in place.
Maniac is imminent. Request advice.
Add the words, or else.
Simon Phoenix! Down, on the ground, or else.
Welcome to 75 Vintage On Demand.
Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that society finally fixed itself. Violent crime, almost non-existent. Guns, gone. Well, at least they're not accessible anymore. The streets are clean. People are polite. Technology has advanced to the point that cars not only drive themselves, but if you have an accident, it wraps you safely in foam. Nobody smokes anymore. No one swears. Nobody eats unhealthy foods anymore. Even physical intimacy has become safer, virtual. Sounds wonderful, right? Until you realize you're not allowed to do most of those things anymore. And suddenly the question becomes, if someone removes your ability to make bad choices, are you actually free? Or any choice, bad, good, or otherwise? That's the hidden horror inside Demolition Man.
Yes! Now, this is what I'm talking about. How do you get in here? Hey. How much do you weigh?
Please vacate the museum, patrons. Be calm. Exhibit is now sealed.
What can I say? I'm a blast from the past.
Should have stayed there.
Spartan? John Spartan? Oh shit, they let anybody into this century. What the? You're on TV. You're dead, Spartan.
Forgot to say Simon Says.
Welcome to 75 Vintage On Demand, where we look beyond the plot to uncover the psychology, behavior, and hidden messages behind the movies we love. If this is your first time here, I'm Vintage, and if you enjoy thoughtful movie analysis that challenge the way you see familiar films, you're in the right place. Because today we're going back to 1993. Revisit a movie that disguised a surprisingly uncomfortable question beneath explosions, one-liners, and 3 seashells. How much freedom are we willing to surrender in exchange for safety? This week, I'm doing something a little different. I'm going to be using clips from Screen Junkies 2023 Honest Trailers for context. And if you're not familiar with Screen Junkies, I encourage you to check their page out. They have some awesome honest trailers that they do for any movie. Now let's ride into San Angeles.
Sylvester Stallone is the Demolition Man, John Spartan, an LA cop with a reputation for blowing things up. Like I said, an LA cop.
LAPD Chief Michael Moore said sorry for the botched detonation.
When he's sent to cryo prison for a crime he did commit, the future will turn to this unfrozen caveman detective to bring his rival to justice. Because in the ironclad logic of movies, it takes crazy to fight crazy.
Demolition Man begins in a version of 1996 that is almost comically violent. Los Angeles is chaotic, crime is rampant, and LAPD officer John Spartan is essentially the badge. He's violent with a badge. He's reckless, aggressive, and willing to destroy half a building if that's what it takes to catch the bad guy. His opposite is Simon Phoenix, one of my favorite characters in this movie. Phoenix doesn't merely commit violence, he enjoys it. When their final confrontation ends catastrophically, both men are sentenced to cryogenic imprisonment. Then Spartan wakes up in 2032. Los Angeles, San Diego, and Santa Barbara have now been merged into San Angeles. And everything Spartan understood about civilization, well, it's gone. But here's where the movie gets clever. Future isn't destroyed. It's beautiful on the surface. Everything seems so pristine, so clean. San Angeles is what happens when conservative society apparently wins. Crime has nearly disappeared. People aren't killing each other anymore, and the streets aren't filled with violence. Technology makes life much easier for people, and people clearly appear healthier, polite, civilized. And at first glance, Dr. Raymond Cocteau has accomplished something extraordinary. He created a peaceful and safe community, and that's important because the movie doesn't work if San Angeles has nothing to offer. There are benefits to this world. The problem is the price. Smoking is illegal, alcohol is illegal, unhealthy food is illegal, firearms are virtually non existent unless you have access to the museum. Profanity results in an automatic fine, and physical sex has largely been replaced with virtual intimacy. Even restaurants have essentially been homogenized. And Taco Bell, what? Somehow won the franchise wars. Apparently, even Dystopia has corporate sponsorship, which is ridiculous. But underneath the joke is something unsettling, however. San Angeles didn't simply discourage undesirable behavior, it began eliminating the individual's ability to choose it. Let's talk about the horror of being perfectly safe. And this is where Demolition Man becomes much more interesting to me as an adult. Safety sounds inherently good. Most of us want safe neighborhoods, safe food, safe workplaces, safe schools. We want everything to be safe and comfortable. But safety and freedom don't always move in the same direction. Sometimes increasing one requires restricting the other. And San Angeles has taken that equation to its extreme. Cocteau society essentially says people cannot be trusted to make good choices for themselves. So we'll make the choices for them. And once you accept that premise, where does it stop? Where is the line in the sand? If unhealthy food harms you, they're going to ban it. And in this society, it is banned. If alcohol can create problems, ban it. If profanity is offensive, fine it. If physical intimacy carries risk, disease, all these other things, replace it with something that is much more safer. Eventually, you're not teaching people self-control or constraint or discipline. You're constructing a world in which self-control is unnecessary because unacceptable choices have already been removed. It kind of reminds me of Minority Report. I'll do one on that one another day. That's not virtue. That's compliance. John Spartan, let's talk about him for a little bit. John Spartan is so disruptive. Spartan is absolutely not an ideal citizen. He's crude, violent, impatient. He swears constantly. He doesn't understand the technology. He is straight Generation X, up and down and through. He can't figure out the three seashells, and neither can I. And he has absolutely no interest in pretending any of this makes sense to him, precisely why the future needs him. Because San Angeles has become so sheltered from violence that when Simon Phoenix appears, the police don't know what to do. They know procedures, they know what they've been taught, they know how to be polite, they know the regulations, they know conflict resolution from an HR standpoint, but they don't know violence. They don't know how to handle it in any sense of the word. They have created a society so protected from danger that it has lost the ability to respond when danger returns. And suddenly the primitive man becomes useful again. San Angeles considers Spartan uncivilized. Yet civilization needs him to survive. What? Right, make that make sense. Let's talk about Lenina Huxley.
In a breakthrough role as Huxley. She's an adorable little sociopath.
We're doing battle with that strangely weapon scrap in the roundhouse.
Huxley, look, this isn't the Wild West, okay? Hurting people's not a good thing.
Who learned all of her English from watching porn.
You really licked his ass. Let's go blow this guy.
And I think she's one of the most interesting characters in the movie. She's fascinated by the 20th century, the music, the language, the action movies. Everything is just so amazing to her. The violence, the culture, she loves all of that. But she has never actually experienced any of it. To her, the dangerous past is exciting. Like something you see on TV, like something you see in a movie, right? Because she only knows it as that, entertainment. There's something incredibly human about that. We romanticize eras we never had to survive. We remember the fashion, the music, the cars, the movies from those eras, and conveniently forget everything that made those periods difficult, because every era has a very, very difficult and probably brutal past. Huxley wants some of Spartan's world. Spartan wants some of hers. Neither fully understands the price the other society paid. And maybe that's the point. Talk about my favorite character in this movie, Simon Phoenix. What happens when evil enters Utopia?
Blade Trinity Snipes is Simon Phoenix, a superpowered terrorist so over the top, he gave Dennis Rodman whatever his whole deal was.
Simon Phoenix is terrifying in San Angeles for a very specific reason. He's not necessarily more dangerous than what he was in 1996. Everyone else has become less prepared for his type of danger. Phoenix enters a world that has practically forgotten deliberate violence exists. The police encounter a murderer, and they respond to that like customer service representatives handling an unusually difficult complaint. Phoenix realizes almost immediately that nobody can stop him, not a single person. And there's something deeply disturbing about that, because you release a sociopath, and I'm not a doctor, but I'm just saying, or somebody like that type, into society with no protections, that's like letting a predator into the hen house. He's going to destroy everything in his path because there's literally no one to stop him. So just think about that. A society can become so successful at eliminating a threat that eventually it forgets why the protections existed in the first place. Phoenix becomes a virus introduced into an immune system that has never encountered disease. And Cocteau knows it. Oh, he was a slimy character, wasn't he? Which brings us to the real villain, Dr. Cocteau, the benevolent dictator. Oh. Cocteau doesn't look like a dictator. That's what makes him interesting. He's calm, intelligent, sophisticated. He genuinely believes he's created a better world for everyone. And compared with the violent society that preceded it, maybe he has. But Cocteau has made one dangerous assumption. His definition of a good life should become everyone else's definition of a good life too. That's where Utopia becomes that's where Utopia becomes authoritarianism. Not necessarily when someone wants to hurt you, but when someone becomes so convinced they know what's best for you better than you know what's best for yourself, that your consent to that person becomes irrelevant because they feel like they know what you need more than you know what you need. In other words, he thinks everyone's stupid except himself. Cocteau doesn't rule through obvious brutality. He rules through paternalism. I'll keep you safe. I'll keep you healthy. I'll keep you comfortable. All you have to surrender is the right to decide what those things mean for yourself. I think Cocteau thinks everyone else is stupid except him. Now let's talk about Edgar Friendly. He's another one of the characters that I thought was really fascinating. And the people underground. And then the movie literally shows us where society puts people who refuse to follow Cocteau's rules. They literally put these people underground. Edgar Friendly and his followers live beneath San Angeles. They're dirty, they're hungry, they're disorganized. They're certainly not presented as another perfect society, at least not in this movie. But Friendly understands something Cocteau doesn't. People want agency. People want autonomy. They want to eat what they want to eat. They want to think how they want to think. They want to believe what they want to believe. Say what they want. All of those things, even if those choices aren't optimal for someone like Cocteau's thinking or like how he thinks, even if those choices occasionally hurt them. Friendly doesn't demand the right to make only good decisions. He demands the right to make his own decisions. And that's a much harder idea. Because freedom includes the possibility that people will choose badly. This is where I think Demolition Man becomes smarter than its premise suggests. The movie doesn't actually argue that Spartan's world was better. 1996 was violent. In real life, it really was. Chaotic, dangerous. Phoenix flourished there. But San Angeles isn't the answer either. One society has too little control. The other has too much. One produces chaos. The other produces conformity. Phoenix represents freedom without conscience. Cocteau represents order without freedom. And Spartan and friendly occupy the uncomfortable territory somewhere between them. Civilization isn't supposed to eliminate that tension. Maybe civilization requires us to constantly negotiate it. Now let's talk about the three seashells.
Okay, 3 seashells time. My first theory is that it's just a bidet control. Shell 1 adjusts the aim. Shell 2 for water pressure. Shell 3 for hot or cold. Theory 2 is that everyone plugs or simply scrapes their butts with the seashells and throws them down the toilet when they're full. This is supported by a 2006 interview with Stallone and does explain the presence of the chrome plunger-like device to the right of the toilet, likely for ramming the used shells down the drain. A complicating factor for these theories, however, is the presence of the scraps community in the LA sewer system. These are densely populated neighborhoods, large enough to support multiple food vendors inside what used to be San Angela's sewer, meaning that the largest sewage and water mains of the city are no longer required for human waste. Poop doesn't appear to even make it underground in this future, leading Simon Phoenix to remark on the underground's comforting home-cooked smell.
Love that smell. Reminds me of biscuits and gravy.
So where does the poop of San Angeles go? How do the 3 seashells really work? Demolition Man remains intentionally obscure on those questions, bringing me to my third, and I believe, most thematically consistent theory. Nobody knows how the 3 seashells work.
The joke has survived longer than almost anything else in the movie because no one ever explains how they work. But there's actually something perfect about that scene. Spartan wakes up in a world where everyone else understands the rules. He doesn't. Everyone laughs at him because he lacks knowledge they consider obvious. And suddenly something as ordinary as using the bathroom becomes alienating. That's what culture shock actually feels like. The rules haven't disappeared. They've changed. And everyone assumes you should already know them. The seashells are funny, but they also represent Spartan's entire experience. As told by Honest Trailers, y'all check that channel out. He's not simply a man from the past. He's an outsider in his own civilization. So what's actually horrifying about Demolition Man? It isn't Simon Phoenix. We know what Phoenix is. He's violent, cruel, and dangerous. That's obvious horror. We can see that with our own eyes. The hidden horror is San Angeles itself, because San Angeles looks good on the surface. It feels safe. Its intentions sound reasonable. And most importantly, it works. That's what makes the question uncomfortable. What if surrendering some freedom really could make society safer? What if banning certain choices really did reduce harm? What if people actually lived longer? What if violent crime practically disappeared? I'm telling you, I have to do one on Minority Report. This is making me think of Minority Report so much. And how much are you willing to give up? And who gets to decide when we've given up enough? Like, all these questions are very valid, and Demolition Man brings it up. And that's where Demolition Man stops being a ridiculous action movie from the 90s and starts asking a question we still haven't answered. And here's the closing. By the end of the movie, Spartan doesn't argue that society should return to the chaos of his time, and Friendly doesn't argue that civilization should disappear. Instead, there's an acknowledgement that maybe both sides need something from the other. People need rules. I definitely agree that society needs some structure, but they also need autonomy. People need safety, yes, but they also need choice. People need civilization, but civilization still has to leave room for people to be people. And sometimes that looks messy and imperfect and occasionally offensive, sometimes irresponsible, and capable of learning from the consequences of their own decisions. Yes, people are capable of that. Maybe that's the real warning inside Demolition Man. A perfect society sounds wonderful. Utopia sounds amazing, until you ask who gets to define perfect. Because a world without danger might sound like paradise, but if achieving it requires removing every meaningful choice, you haven't eliminated the prison. You've just made it comfortable. Okay? And maybe that's the hidden horror of San Angeles. You can eat at Taco Bell. You can listen to advertising jingles all day. You can live without violent crime. You can even use the three seashells if you can figure them out. You can't necessarily live on your own terms, not in this society. And I'll leave you with this. How much personal freedom would you genuinely be willing to surrender if you were guaranteed a safer, healthier, more peaceful society in return? And more importantly, who would you trust to decide what you should surrender? Tell me in the comments. If you enjoyed this analysis, subscribe to 75 Vintage on Demand, where we look beyond the plot to uncover psychology, behavior, and hidden messages behind the movies we love. See you at the movies. Bye.